Hello, and welcome to episode 16 of Mo Money. 16 episodes, 4 weeks, we're celebrating with a big old woo! Happy anniversary to Mo Money. Tastes good. We are, of course, the investing show for millennials by a millennial, where our goal is to educate, entertain, and empower a new generation of investors. I am, of course, the #1 host of all financially based shows for millennials for 4 months running now, MC Mo. Now let's get started with
the Mo Money Market Update.
The market has remained pretty much unchanged over the past week, but that's not to say that it was uneventful. There were 1% up days, 1% down days, or days where the market didn't move at all. I said weeks ago that people are starting to believe that the bull market is slowing down, which may be true, but it does not seem like a bear market is setting in just yet. Oil has remained pretty much unchanged as well since last week. Fears of the Canadian fire have crept into traders' minds, but ultimately did little to affect the price in either way. Big news in the earning world shows that retailers are getting slammed. People are not shopping in brick and mortar stores anymore, like Kohl's, Nordstrom, and Macy's especially. All these retailers reported abysmal profits. Seems like people are taking their money elsewhere to purchase their goods. But where? Amazon? Yeah, it's Amazon. In our weekly Valiant update, Joe Papa from Perigo was named the new CEO of Valiant and pretty much just regurgitated the same shit that Ackman's been saying, which all sounds good, but it was reported just Thursday that the Cleveland Clinic, one of the largest customers of Valiant, said that they had not received the 30% discount on the drugs that they were promised by Valiant, which sent the shares spiraling downwards. The drama for this company continues. There's no doubt that things on Wall Street can be fucked up. People can get away with doing shady things, and if they do get caught, they often get a slap on the wrist and nothing worse. Is it possible to write laws that completely prevent any sort of illegal activities and make markets totally safe and unshakable? I don't know, maybe, but most humans, especially politicians, are too fucking stupid to know how to do it anyhow. That's just life. There will always be bad people who do bad things, but that doesn't mean that we should just give up. This brings us to this week's topic, Wall Street reform. Now, Wall Street reform is an issue that has come up in the recent campaign trail, mostly on the Democratic side. And one of the first and most historic pieces of legislation of Wall Street reform goes all the way back to 1933, titled the Banking Act of 1933, also referred to as the Glass-Steagall Act, a piece of legislation that you will often hear cited by Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, amongst others, calling for a reinstallation of the act, and Hillary Clinton calling it stupid or something along those lines. It was one of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first acts as president and was designed to help pull the United States out of a terrible depression. The act set forth 4 new major rules into place in hopes of preventing future depressions and market crashes, which it did successfully for 60 plus years. Now, one of the main provisions of Glass-Steagall was the separation of financial activities, including commercial banks and investment banks. Now, to put it simply,
investment banks are gamblers. Commercial banks are where you have a savings account and a checking account. After the Great Depression, Congress wanted to put a firewall between the investment banks and the commercial banks. They wanted to make sure that Wall Street could melt to the ground and the commercial banks wouldn't be touched. They passed a law, the Glass-Steagall Act. Now, you could be Gordon Gekko or George Bailey, but you couldn't be both.
Now, one of the causes of the Great Depression was commercial banks using people's deposited money and making speculative bets with them. And when they lost those bets, guess who was fucked? Everyone. Now, the GSA, Glass-Steagall Act, prevented commercial banks from taking part in non-commercial bank activities, i.e. creating securities and making speculative bets. Now, another provision was the creation of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This is to prevent people from getting fucked from banks doing stupid things with your money. Basically, it says if a bank does stupid shit with your money and they lose it, it's insured. Today, your savings are insured up to $250,000. Third rule was a regulation of speculation. This provision called for the Federal Reserve Bank of each district to monitor its local branches to ensure that they were not doing anything over speculative with a bank's credit. Basically, it prevented your local commercial banks from giving loans to broker-dealers and pushed for banks to speculate in more productive sectors of the economy, as Glass hoped it would. One of the final provisions of Glass-Steagall was now required member banks of each Federal Reserve to send in 3 reports annually, updating them on the actions and the health of their banks. The Glass-Steagall Act was basically an insurance to prevent banks with people's money from making highly risky and speculative bets with citizens' money, creating transparency and holding people responsible for banks' negligence. Okay, this was the law of the land for over 60 years and it worked well. It helped the United States become a major economic superpower. Now, fast forward to the 1980s, the call for repeal of Glass-Steagall all started to gain traction and it was working. Piece by piece, financial institutions in Congress started to slowly chip away at the Glass-Steagall Act.
The culture of deregulation culminates in 1999.
Glass-Steagall gets repealed.
And immediately banks start merging. Now, Gordon Gekko can use George Bailey's bank balance to make bets.
Where is
President Bill Clinton signed the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which all but crushed what was left of the Glass-Steagall Act. The main provision was that commercial banks and investment banks were once again allowed to merge and become one bank, as well as merge with other financial institutions such as insurance companies. It all started with Citibank, who merged with Travelers Insurance and Smith Barney, an investment bank, and others, forming Citigroup. This caused banks to grow into the big banks, the too big to fail banks that we know now, which are essentially financial supermarkets. They are a one-stop shop for everything a person could need, from a savings account to an investment account, from life insurance to homeowner insurance, all under one roof. There was one man who strongly opposed this bill and boldly voted nay, as nearly all others voted yay.
It will lead to fewer banks and financial service providers, increased charges and fees for individual consumers and small businesses, diminished credit for rural America, and taxpayer exposure to potential losses should a financial conglomerate fail. It will lead to more mega mergers, a small number of corporations dominating the financial service industry, and further concentration of economic power in this country. The U.S. Public Interest Research Group and the Federal Reserve Bank have conducted studies and confirmed that bigger banks charge larger fees. It is time for the Congress to stand up for the consumers. Let's vote no on this legislation.
Gentlemen, he knew that this bill was not what was best for consumers, he knew it was not best for competition, and he knew it was not best for the economy. With the tearing down of financial walls, big banks were formed. Regulation was eased, banks started engaging in non-core activities such as securities and derivatives, and it all reached a breaking point in 2007, the financial crisis. 2002 to 2007 was somewhat of a huge party. Banks were loaning money, giving credit cards to anybody with a pulse, people were spending money, markets were going up, and everything and everyone was gay. All of a sudden it all came crashing down when it was discovered housing markets was nothing but a bubble, and that bubble was popping. Banks now held absolutely worthless mortgages given to people who couldn't afford to pay them. They held credit card debt for people who could not pay it back, and student loan debt for graduates who could not find jobs to pay it back. These big banks were left holding billions and billions of dollars in debt for poor speculative bets. It's about to pull them under, and innocent Americans and innocent Americans' money under with them. But we know how the story goes. Obama created a stimulus package, and we used taxpayer money to buy up all the bad debt of these financial institutions. Federal Reserve started printing money and pumping it back into the market to prevent it from crashing into a depression. But that's all a story for another day. In response to all this, after coming into office, Obama signed the Dodd-Frank Act, a bill designed to make sure that another financial crisis would be averted. Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act was signed into law on July 21st, 2010. The main provisions of the act are as follows. 1. Creation of government oversight committees. They serve as watchdogs on the financial sector. They meet quarterly to ensure nothing sketchy is going on in the markets. The councils are the Financial Stability Oversight Council and the Office of Financial Research. These are the two main councils. The second was the Volcker Rule, a provision that calls for greater transparency and prevention of speculative trading by banks and greater regulation on derivative trading. Number 3, also created an SEC Council for Credit Rating to prevent rating agencies from giving false and misleading ratings to securities that could lead investors to believe that the securities they are buying are highly secure. Number 4, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is one of the biggest provisions of the act, designed to prevent financial institutions from giving out predatory loans on things such as mortgages and credit cards. Finally, it requires banks to present living wills, essentially a guideline of procedures in place for banks if they are to file for bankruptcy in orderly fashion. So far, none of the big banks have been able to come up with suitable living wills. Now, all this talk about legislation, acts, all that stuff, the reason all this information is important is it is important for you as an investor, as a voter, and a consumer to know the regulations that financial institutions must operate by. They are set in place in order to protect you. Are they 100% effective? Tough to say. The big banks have only grown since the crisis, as the crisis did allow the big banks to buy up more banks at rock bottom prices. You'll hear Bernie Sanders call for the breaking up of these big banks, and even Hillary Clinton is starting to get on in the movement as she attempts to pull some of Sanders' supporters to her side. Now, it's easier said than done to break up big banks. Some argue that big banks are necessary in order to fund big loans for big companies, but then that would argue that maybe some companies are too big. Now, bottom line, big banks are too big if they are too big to fail. Nothing should be too big to fail. That is the opposite of capitalism. Everything should be able to fail if it sucks. Okay? If the government has to step in and save you every time that you fuck up, that would be communism. The government funding you is communism. But with such large concentration of wealth, it is hard to let them fail. They basically have a stranglehold on citizens. A failing of big banks could cause a catastrophic effect to those outside of the company. I'm no expert, but this should not be allowed. out. It will be interesting to see where this conversation goes with the upcoming election. Win or lose though, Bernie Sanders has won. Okay, he has brought up these issues this election that have previously been untouched, unthought about, uncared about. Should we bring back Glass-Steagall? Was it the dismantling of this act that caused the financial crisis? It's all tough to say. There are arguments on both sides, but it certainly did not help. Changes have to be made, but they have to be rational and not drastic. Banks are essential, and just like Big Pharma, they're not evil. They're just run by evil, greedy people sometimes. Banks fund companies that have made America great. Punish and suffocate them too severely would cause our economy to suffer. If breaking up big banks turns out to be the best measure, then by all means break them up. But don't break them up for no reason other than punishment. Thank you for watching another episode. You know we'll be here every Friday with a new episode of
Mo Money.
Make sure to comment, like, subscribe, share my page, follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook.
Mo Money.
Signing out.